I was simply looking for a quiet moment in the woods, a chance to soak in the peace of nature. But everything changed when I encountered someone who turned my day, and maybe my life, upside down. His presence was magnetic. His energy impossible to ignore. And though I barely knew him, I felt drawn into a world of mystery and unspoken connection. At 63, I'd come to cherish the little joys life offers. A serene walk among tall trees, the crisp scent of the forest air, and the gentle rustle of leaves. It was my way of escaping the noise of the world. That day, the sky was a clear blue, the sunlight dappled through the branches. It was perfect, or so I thought. As I wandered deeper into the woods, rounding a familiar bend, I froze. Leaning casually against a tree was a tall figure. His presence commanding yet calm. His broad shoulders and strong frame seemed almost out of place in this tranquil setting. Our eyes met, and for a moment time felt suspended. There was something unusual about him, something that pulled at me without explanation. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," he said. His voice smooth and deep, carrying a warmth that disarmed me. I managed a small smile, though my heart was already beating faster. "Neither did I," I replied softly. We stood in silence for a moment, the space between us thick with unspoken tension. Something about him intrigued me, a quiet intensity in his gaze that both unsettled and fascinated me. Against my better judgment, I found myself stepping closer, as if caught in some invisible pull. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his lips curling into an easy, confident smile. My hesitation lasted only a second. "Sure, why not?" I said, surprising myself with how much I welcomed his company. We began walking together, our steps falling into a natural rhythm as we ventured deeper into the forest. The air seemed to change around us, growing heavier, more charged. Our conversation started light, exchanging thoughts about the beauty of the woods, but an undercurrent of something stronger ran beneath it all. Every now and then, our arms would brush, a simple gesture that felt strangely comforting in the quiet of the forest. We eventually reached a clearing bathed in golden sunlight, the quiet intimacy of the moment settling over us. He turned to face me, and I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. His gaze locked onto mine. His expression serious yet filled with something deeper, something unspoken. "You're different," he murmured, his voice low and deliberate. I swallowed hard, my heart racing as the tension grew. "I could say the same about you." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to brush a loose strand of hair from my face. The gesture was gentle, as if trying to reassure me. His presence, so steady and confident, stirred feelings I hadn't felt in years. There was something about him, something I couldn't quite explain but didn't want to let go of. His hand lingered, resting gently on my arm, and I couldn't ignore the warmth radiating from him. As he moved closer, the world around us seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of my quickened breath and the pounding of my heart. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his words soft yet intense. I could feel the warmth of his breath as he leaned closer. "I've never met anyone like you," he said, his words stirring something deep within me. My heart raced, the tension between us thick in the quiet clearing. Before I could respond, he closed the distance, his expression soft and thoughtful. It was a quiet moment of connection, one that left me feeling unexpectedly close to him. His kiss grew deeper, more confident, and I felt his presence grounding me in a way that was both comforting and exhilarating. My hand instinctively moved to his chest, resting lightly as I absorbed the warmth of the moment. There was a strength in him that felt grounding, yet the way he held me also made me feel light, almost untethered. It was a blend of safety and exhilaration I hadn't felt in years. As we stood close, the silence between us deep and meaningful. The moment felt overwhelming, but also comforting in its sincerity. My hands moved to his shoulders, holding on to him as though I'd lose my balance otherwise. Every touch sent ripples of warmth through me, awakening something I thought I'd long forgotten. When his hand brushed against mine, I felt a spark of connection that resonated deeply within me, stirring something I hadn't felt in years. His movements were careful yet assured, each gesture deliberate, as though he were discovering something entirely new. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his dark eyes searching mine. His chest rose and fell with each shallow breath, and I could see the same intensity reflected in his gaze that I felt burning inside me. "You're incredible," he whispered, his voice low and thick with emotion. I could only nod, unable to find the words to express the pull I felt toward him. As he leaned in again, his lips found my neck, trailing soft kisses that made my skin tingle. His touch wasn't rushed. It was as though he wanted to memorize every moment, every sensation. It wasn't just passion, it was connection, a sense of being fully present in the moment. His hands moved down to hold me firmly, and I felt the strength in the way he guided me. Each touch, each movement seemed to carry its own electricity, building an intensity between us that was impossible to ignore. The world around us faded, leaving only the two of us, moving together in perfect harmony. The feeling was overwhelming, like stepping into the unknown yet knowing it was exactly where I wanted to be. Every glance, every word, every touch built upon the last, until the tension between us reached a crescendo that left me breathless. My heart raced, my breath quickened as the moment built into something I couldn't fully explain. He was right there with me, his presence steady and reassuring, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. In that moment, emotions surged through me like a wave, leaving me breathless and overwhelmed. I reached for his shoulders, seeking balance as the intensity of the moment enveloped us. He followed soon after, his body tensing as he reached his own breaking point, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The way he held me, the raw vulnerability in his embrace, made the moment feel more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. We stayed close, the quiet clearing wrapping around us like a cocoon, as we shared a sense of peace and understanding that felt deeper than words. The sunlight filtered gently through the trees, casting a golden glow over us as we stayed close, sharing the quiet peace of the clearing. I could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against mine, a quiet reminder that we were here, together, in a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal. Something had shifted between us, something deep and unshakable. As I sat up, still close enough for our foreheads to nearly touch, I found myself asking the question that hovered in the air. "What now?" My voice wavered, a mix of hope and uncertainty. His smile widened, and there was a playful glint in his eyes that made my heart flutter. "Well," he began, his tone warm and earnest, "I'd like to know more about you. I want to hear your stories, your dreams. Everything." His words sent a rush of warmth through me, and I couldn't help but smile. "I could say the same about you. What brought you out here today?" He hesitated, his expression turning thoughtful. "I guess I needed an escape. Life's been complicated lately. I wanted to reconnect with something real, something raw. And then I found you." The vulnerability in his voice struck a chord within me, stirring something I couldn't quite put into words. "I understand," I said softly, reaching out to entwine my fingers with his. "Sometimes life feels overwhelming, and we just need to step away to breathe." For a moment, we simply held each other's gaze, the connection between us deep and unspoken. It felt as though the universe had brought us together, two wandering souls finding solace in one another in the most unexpected of places. "Can we stay here a little longer?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not ready to go back to reality yet." I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "I'd like that." We settled back down, our bodies fitting together as though they were meant to. As the sunlight danced through the leaves above us, we shared pieces of ourselves, each story unfolding like petals of a flower. He spoke of his life, the highs and lows, the moments that shaped him into the man he was. I shared my own journey, the heartbreak I had endured, the loneliness that had quietly settled into the corners of my life. With every word, the bond between us grew stronger, a fragile yet unbreakable connection taking shape. The air was rich with the scent of pine and wildflowers, and the soft sound of birdsong drifted in the breeze. It was the perfect backdrop for a moment that felt timeless. Hours seemed to slip away unnoticed until the golden light of the setting sun lit his eyes, making them shine with an intensity that caught me off guard. "I have to be honest," he said, leaning closer. His voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've never felt this way before. It's like I've known you forever." My heart quickened at his confession, excitement and uncertainty mingling in my chest. I searched his gaze, finding a sincerity there that made it impossible to doubt his words. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But what does this mean for us?" He held my gaze, his expression open yet uncertain, as though searching for the right words. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice steady, "but I do know that I want to explore this connection. I want to see where it leads." His honesty filled me with hope, and I couldn't help but smile. A sense of possibility stirred within me, like the first bloom of spring after a long winter. "I'd like that too," I replied. "I've spent so much time chasing what I thought I wanted that I forgot to leave room for the unexpected." His grin widened, his eyes lighting up with a joy that was impossible to ignore. "Then let's not overthink it," he said. "Let's just enjoy this moment and see where it takes us." Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips finding mine in a kiss that felt like a promise, a quiet pledge to embrace whatever came next. The kiss was soft but full of passion, a perfect blend of hope and desire. My hands found their way to his hair, my fingers tangling in it as I surrendered to the warmth of the moment. Everything else fell away, the world, time, everything but us. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, a smile lingered on my lips. I knew then that this moment, this day, was a turning point. Meeting Wesley had opened a door I hadn't even realized was there, offering a path toward something new, something beautiful. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the clearing, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The woods had given me more than just solitude today. They had given me a chance at connection, at rediscovery. I met his gaze, his dark eyes soft and full of meaning, and I knew I was ready. Ready to take a chance on the unknown and follow this path, wherever it might lead. The world around us seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of us wrapped in the afterglow of the moment. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. I turned slightly, meeting his eyes again, and the look he gave me took my breath away. It wasn't just desire I saw there. There was something deeper, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. "You've turned my world upside down," he murmured, his voice soft but edged with wonder. "I didn't expect this. Not today, not ever really." I smiled, his words igniting a warmth deep in my chest. "Neither did I. I was just looking for a quiet walk. And then there you were." He chuckled, the sound low and rich, resonating through the clearing. "I guess we both wandered farther than we planned." We stayed there, our bodies still close, the quiet rustle of the leaves above us creating a soothing backdrop. For a moment, it felt as though the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us. I reached out, my fingers brushing against his jaw, marveling at the rough texture of his stubble. He leaned into my touch, his smile soft and full of sincerity, though a playful spark danced in his eyes. That spark, that mixture of mischief and tenderness, made my heart flutter. It felt as though the forest around us shared in the moment, alive with a kind of quiet magic. "Maybe we were meant to meet," I said softly, voicing the thought that had been circling in my mind. "Maybe this was supposed to happen." He didn't answer right away, but the look he gave me said everything. Perhaps the forest had conspired to bring us together. Or maybe it was something deeper, a force neither of us could name but both of us felt. We sat in the clearing, the golden sunlight painting the forest in hues of amber and gold, as if the world itself had conspired to freeze this moment in time. His hand was warm in mine, grounding me even as my mind whirled with questions I hadn't dared to ask. "Do you think we're crazy?" I finally whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He turned his gaze to me, his dark eyes brimming with both tenderness and mischief. For finding each other out here. For believing that maybe this is something real. For all of it, I said softly. For thinking we could just step away from the world and have this together. His expression softened and he reached out, his fingertips brushing against my cheek. What does it matter what the world thinks, he said, his voice steady, calm. They don't know what we've found here. They don't know you or me, or the way this feels like coming home after being lost for so long. My chest tightened at his words, my heart thudding painfully against my ribs. But they will have opinions, I murmured, glancing down at our joined hands. People always do. They'll talk about the differences between us, about how it doesn't make sense. They'll talk because they don't understand, he said, his voice carrying an edge of determination now. They've boxed themselves into a life of rules and expectations, and they can't imagine someone breaking free from it. But we don't owe them an explanation, do we? I hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at the edges of the moment. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice. I've spent too much of my life living for what other people expect of me. I'm done with that. And if us, feels right, then why should anything else matter? His conviction was intoxicating, and yet a small part of me still clung to the threads of doubt. But the world isn't always kind to people who don't fit its expectations, I said. What if they think I'm too old for you? That this isn't right? He tilted his head, his brow furrowing as if I'd just spoken in a language he didn't understand. Too old, he repeated, as though the concept itself was laughable. What does age have to do with anything? You, brilliant, beautiful, kind. You've lived a life full of stories and lessons I'm lucky to hear. That's what matters to me. Not some number on a piece of paper. My throat tightened, emotions rising so quickly I barely managed to keep them in check. It's not just about us, though. People judge what they don't understand. They'll see this and think it's wrong because it's not what they're used to. He shifted closer, his hand cupping my face now, forcing me to look directly into his eyes. They'll think whatever they want. But I know the truth. I know that when I'm with you I feel alive. I feel seen, understood, in a way I've never felt before. And if they can't see that, if they can't understand what love actually looks like, then that's on them, not us. A soft laugh escaped me, though it was tinged with the threat of tears. You make it sound so easy to just defy the world. It's not about defying anything, he said, his tone softening. It's about choosing happiness. It's about saying yes to the things that make life worth living. And you're worth it. This is worth it. I reached up, my hand covering his, the warmth of his palm against my cheek grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. You really believe that? With everything I have, he said, his voice a vow. I don't care what the world thinks. Care about you. About us. His words wrapped around me, dissolving the last remnants of doubt that clung stubbornly to my heart. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes as I let his certainty wash over me. What if it's not just the world we have to convince? I whispered. What if the doubts come from within us too? Then we face them together, he said without hesitation. We talk, we fight if we have to, but we don't give up. Not on this. I opened my eyes to find him watching me, his expression open and raw in a way that made my breath catch. You have a way of making everything seem so possible, I said, my voice barely audible. Because it is, he said simply. Love doesn't care about age or rules or what people think. Love is the force that moves us, that brings us here now. I believe that with everything I have. And I believe in you. For the first time I allowed myself to fully believe him. To believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake. That the universe had brought us together for a reason. I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I'd given in years. If you're willing to face the world with me, then I think I can be brave enough to try. His own smile broke across his face, lighting up the space between us. That's all I need, he said. He leaned forward, capturing my lips in a kiss that felt like a promise. A quiet vow to defy the odds, to embrace the connection we'd found despite the world's expectations. As we pulled apart, I felt a warmth blooming in my chest, a certainty that had been missing for far too long. The forest around us seemed to come alive in that moment, as though it, too, recognized the magnitude of what had just passed between us. The rustling of leaves, the distant song of a bird, the golden light spilling through the trees. It all felt like a blessing, a sign that we were on the right path. "You're right," I said softly, my fingers trailing down his cheek. "Love doesn't care about age. And neither do I." His grin widened, his eyes alight with something that felt a lot like triumph. "Good," he said. "Because I'm not letting you go." And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the world in a soft golden glow, I realized I didn't want him to. For the first time in a long time I felt alive. Whole. Ready to face whatever came next, with him by my side.